Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. Pride Month hasn't been going too well for the radical left. It began in the wake of the whole anti-woke boycotts. It was criticized for parades where homosexuals said that they were coming for your children, and has now ended with a Supreme Court decision that says you cannot be forced to support the movement. Now, the justices were split 6-3 along partisan lines. They determined that a Christian web designer in Colorado cannot be forced to work on a homosexual wedding project. It even goes beyond that. The decision applies more broadly, and it gives people the right to refuse to endorse a message they disagree with in their creative work. What you choose to endorse or not to endorse, these are now protected officially under the First Amendment of the Constitution. They cannot force you to make websites, just as they can't force you to make cakes. Although, given the ongoing lawsuits along these lines, well, I'll be darned if they don't keep trying. Now, of course, not everyone sees it this way. Some want to see compelled speech and compelled behavior as well. And they view the idea of the homosexual community no longer being able to force people to support them, even if it violates a person's religion, as a stripping away of LGBT rights. Well, actually, briefly on that, in Canada, the LGBT movement, which became the LGBTQ movement, then transformed into the LGBTQIA2S+ movement, is now being referred to as the 2STNBGC movement. And nobody dare call them otherwise. That's misgendering. And in some countries, that's even hate speech. In fact, it may make you an extremist. But back to the idea of not everyone being behind the Supreme Court ruling. If you go by CNN, they frame it as new limits on LGBTQ protections. They're not less protected, less safe, because they can't force people to support them against their will. Now, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg wrote on Twitter that discrimination is wrong. He said using religion as an excuse to discriminate is wrong and unconstitutional. Today's ruling will move America backward. Now, it has been framed as allowing businesses to discriminate against people of a protected class. But what's a protected class? Doesn't the idea of a protected class suggest that some people are granted more rights than others? Isn't that also a form of discrimination? Now, discrimination, of course, goes both ways. From another perspective, Christians were the ones being discriminated against, at least under the incumbent rules. That, however, appears to now be changing with today's ruling as well as one yesterday. Now, remember, yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled against a lower court in favor of a U.S. Postal Service worker, a Christian who refused to work on Sunday because of his religion. The ruling interprets, for the first time in many years, in fact, a 46-year-old precedent known as the Trans World Airlines v. Hardison, and the 1977 decision held that to reject an employee's request for religious accommodation under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the employer needs only to demonstrate that the accommodation imposes an undue hardship on the business. Now, Justice Samuel Alito wrote the court's opinion in Groff v. DeJoy, and the respondent, Luis DeJoy, is the U.S. Postmaster General. He wrote this: based on a line in this court's decision in Hardison, many lower courts have interpreted undue hardship to mean any effort or cost that is more than de minimis. Now, it notes in this case, however, both parties agree of the de minimis reading of the Hardison as being a mistake. With the benefit of thorough briefing and oral argument, we today clarify that Title VII requires. Now, back to today's decision. It's 303 Creative v. Elenis. The website designer was hoping to expand her business, and she began doing websites for weddings. Under Colorado law, however, there are regulations on what's known as public accommodation. Ms. Smith was worried that the law could violate her First Amendment rights if it forced her, for example, to celebrate marriages that she does not endorse. The law defines a public accommodation, again in Colorado, as any business that sells to the public in any place that offers services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations to the public. And for any of these accommodations, the state law holds it is illegal to deny any type of accommodation on the grounds of disability, race, creed, color, sex orientation, marital status, sex, national origin, or ancestry. Essentially, the law is written broadly enough that any type of business would be held to it, and that many forms of refusal for service could be deemed illegal. But what about when providing a service, for example, violates a person's religion or violates their own system of values? Would it not be also a form of constitutional discrimination? Well, state-run discrimination in this case. And on a more basic level, would this also violate a person's freedom of speech? Remember, under the Constitution, the government cannot legally violate a person's rights to freedom of speech or freedom of belief. And this is likewise what the Supreme Court ruled today, in fact. In the court opinion, Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote, "Like many states, Colorado has a law forbidding businesses from engaging in discrimination when they sell goods and services to the public. Laws along these lines have done much to secure the civil rights of all Americans. But in this particular case, Colorado does not just seek to ensure the sale of goods or services on equal terms. It seeks to use its law to compel an individual to create speech she does not believe." The question we face is whether that course violates the free speech clause of the First Amendment, and the justices determined that the Colorado law was in fact violating Ms. Smith's constitutional rights. They wrote this: "As surely as Ms. Smith seeks to engage in protected First Amendment speech, Colorado seeks to compel speech Ms. Smith does not wish to provide." They note what it would mean if they determined otherwise, and they state this: "Consider what a contrary approach would mean. Under Colorado's logic, the government may compel anyone who speaks for pay on a given topic to accept all commissions on that same topic, no matter the underlying message, if the topic somehow implicates a customer's statutory protected trait." Now, the ruling today clarifies that not only can the government not censor us, as the Constitution is typically seen as holding, but the government also cannot force us to say something that we don't want to say. And this constitutional protection also allows us, interestingly, to discriminate in accordance with our opinions and our beliefs. Stay tuned after the break. We'll go into what today's Supreme Court decision means for American law and the rights we have going forward. Welcome back. As we've been discussing, the Supreme Court ruled today in favor of free speech. The justices held that a website designer could not be forced to create a homosexual website. Here to speak with us about the ruling and what it means for protected speech is Matt Sharp. He's senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. This is the firm representing the web designer, Lori Smith, who just won her case in front of the Supreme Court. Hey, Matt Sharp, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Thanks for having me.
So I understand your legal group won the case today. How does this affect the nation? Is this just about Colorado? What's the broader impact here?
Yeah, the win today in 303 Creative was a great victory for every American who is concerned about the government having the power to compel them to speak a message or to support an idea that they disagree with. Because if Colorado could force Lori to create websites expressing views about marriage that she disagrees with, it could force any American to speak in ways and to support causes and ideas that violate their beliefs.